Imagine having a grid of pixels. Each pixel contains a value. So at start, if you don't do anything, the value will be 0. But let's say we add an image, a sprite in our UI. So now we want each pixel inside of that image to have the value 1. Cool. Now let's try and turn this into a mask. So now let's consider all of the black pixels. If you don't see a value, the value is 0. So let's add another image. Let's say we only want to render the part of this image that is contained inside of our first image, our mask. We are just going to check for every pixel, and whenever the value is 1, we render the pixel. If it's 0, we don't render it. We will end up with a mask. And if we want a better effect, we can actually hide our mask image to end up with this little square. Cool. How can we now unmask an image, like used in tutorials in mobile games? Let's take our previous example. We've got one where we've got our mask or the space we want to display, and everything else is 0. Let's now scale up our red image, and we are just going to say, hey, now display the pixels that have a value of 0 or less than 1. We end up with this, and again, if we want a better effect, we can hide our unmasked image to get this result. So now let's learn how we can apply this effect in Unity. Okay, so I have a really simple setup right here. I have a main camera, it's orthographic, it doesn't matter here, and a canvas that I'm going to enable. Okay, let's create our mask image. So right-click, UI, image, let's call it mask. So we can just make it bigger, let's say 600 by 600 pixels, and change its color to blue. There you go. This is our mask. Now let's create the object we want to mask. So let's change its color to red. There you go. And we're going to move it somewhere around here. So now we only want to display the pixels that are inside of the mask. How can we do that? First off, let's change the name of our object and create 2 materials. So I'm going to open the materials folder, right-click, create a new material, and call it mask. Same thing for the masked. So let's Control D or Command D for Mac users. Masked. There you go. Both of these should use the UI default shader. So let's select our mask, assign the mask material. Let's select the mask now and assign the masked material. Perfect. So at start, as we've seen previously, all of the pixels have the value 0. Now we want to put the value 1 wherever we've got our mask image. So the value that we want to put is the stencil ID. So let's set the value 1. After that, to replace the values, you actually need to set the operation here to 2 to replace the values. So now we've got 0 everywhere except inside of our mask. We've got the value 1. For the masked element, we've got a value of 0 right now. So this is the stencil ID, but we want to make it visible only where the value is 1. So what we can do is set the value to 1. And for the comparison, we're going to set 3, which is equal. And don't worry, I don't grab these numbers from my magical hat. I'm going to show you in a moment where I do grab them from. I just want you to understand the basic principles now. But hey, we've created a mask. Awesome! So now let's quickly create an unmask. Okay, so we can simply duplicate this canvas, hide the previous one. Okay, we are going to create a screen, let's say. Okay, let's scale it up. Okay, cool. This is going to be our unmask now. Boom. We can create 2 new materials. So one for the screen and another one for the unmask. Perfect. So let's assign them one more time. Screen, unmask. Cool. Let's change these shaders. Okay, so UI, default. Perfect. So the screen right now is really basic, and same thing for the unmask. So first off, to keep the same colors that we've used previously, we are going to change these. So this should be the screen, and this should be the unmask. So we're just going to set a value of 600 by 600, and the unmask here should scale up. Perfect. And make sure that your screen here, and this is the unmask, is after the unmask. Remember, this is what we had in our drawing. So the unmask right here will write a value of 1. Okay, so again, we want to set the operation to 2 to replace all of the values that we have. Then what we want is select our screen. If we put in the same values here, so 3 and 1, we have a mask like we had previously. But if we only want to display the parts that are outside of the unmask sprite, we can either change the stencil ID, this is one possibility, or we can keep the same stencil ID and change the comparison. So let's say inside of our unmask, we've got the value 1. So the operation we need to use here is greater, because 1 is greater than 0. Remember, wherever we don't have anything, the value is 0. And the value of this element is 1. So if we set the comparison to 5, we are going to display the parts that have an ID greater than whatever was here before. And to hide our element here, we can simply set the color mask to 0. Perfect. You've created a mask like you can find in tutorials. Boom! So now for the comparison values or operations, you can simply check out Unity's documentation, which is right here. You see, I did not grab the values from my hat. So if you never want to display or render the pixels, you are going to use the value 1. If you want to check if it's less, 2, 3, 4 equal, and so on. Same thing for the stencil values. If the stencil value operation is 0, you're going to keep the current value that is in the stencil buffer. If you want to replace the value, so this is what we've done right here with our unmask. Initially, all of the values were 0, but we replaced them, stencil operation 2. We replaced the values inside of the unmask sprite or UI element or image by 1, our stencil ID. There are so many operations we could do and so many comparisons too. So feel free to experiment with these. So now let's tackle the stencil write and read masks. They are not super important, except if you want to have multiple masks or create wonky effects. But yeah, let's have a look at how we can use them. So now imagine having 2 masks with the same stencil ID. Now I can use the term stencil ID. Both of them have a stencil ID of 3 and everything else is 0. Okay? So 3 is the decimal value, but if we want to write the binary value, we're going to write 0011, okay? So the first and second bits are active. Cool. Here are our 2 masks, and what we want to do is only use the first bit of the mask number 1. Remember, we had 3, 0011, but we only want the first bit, so we're going to write 0001. And for now, let's keep the values for the second mask. So if you want the decimal values, here they are. We're going to have 1 and 3 for all of the pixels inside of the second mask, okay? So we have 2 different values right now. Let's do the same thing for the second mask. Let's say we only want to keep the second bit of the second mask, so 0010. The decimal value here will be 2. But for the center or the intersection of both masks, we are going to have the 2 bits that are active, the 2 last bits. So the decimal value will be 3, right? Now, if we add our third image, we can decide to display it wherever the ID is 3, or wherever the ID is less than 3, or whatever you want. You decide here. So now let's try and do that in Unity. Okay, so we can just hide our canvas, duplicate it, and call it write mask canvas, let's say. Cool. We're going to enable it. Let's create our first mask. So this is the first one. We're going to assign it the mask material. We're going to duplicate the unmask and call it mask 2, by the way. Let's rename this one mask 1. So this one should be bluish too. Yeah, let's just move it somewhere around here and make sure that it has the mask material. And this is going to be our masked element. Okay. I'm going to change the color to reddish, perfect, and change its size to 600 by 600. Okay, so right now it seems like it is behind the elements, but in the hierarchy, it should be on top of them, right? Anyway, we are going to deal with that. So all of these 3 elements or materials will have a stencil ID of 3. We want to keep the operation to 2, okay? And for the masked element, same thing, stencil ID of 3. And for the comparison, for now, we're just going to set 8. So always render it. Remember, 8 will always render the pixels. Okay, so now let's use the write masks. For the first one, we want to write or use the first bit. So the value will be 1. For the second one, the write mask will be 2. So right now we can notice that we need another material. So mask number 2, and this one is going to be mask number 1. Let's use this material in here. Perfect. And set the right mask to 2. Cool. So now what do we have? If we hide the masked element for now, we have 0 outside of the masks, 1 wherever we only have the first mask, 2 where we have the second mask, and in the intersection, we have an ID of 3, exactly like we had right here in our demonstration. So let's try this out. If we enable our masked element right here, we are going to use the comparison 3, which is equal. So now we can notice that our stencil ID is 3 and we are using the equal comparison. So it's only going to display where the stencil ID is 3, which is right here. If we set the stencil ID to 1, it's only going to render where the stencil ID is 1. And same thing for 2. How cool is that? If we set it to 0, boom, it's going to render behind them because this is the only places where the stencil ID equals 0 and where the image exists, of course. Okay, so let's keep that to 3. And we can also decide what we want to read. If we only want to read the first bit, it's going to display wherever we have the first bit active. So it's equivalent to a simple mask that we've done previously. So this is why this is not super useful here. So same thing for 2 and finally 3, as we had. Okay? I hope this is clear. If we want again to hide these 2 elements, we can simply set the color mask to 0, because if you set the transparency to 0, it's not going to work as expected. Okay? We expect some transparency here or some alpha value. At least you can set it to 1. You are going to have the same result, but it's cleaner to use a color mask of 0 to completely hide your image. Okay, so one last thing before we complete this. If you have some rounded images, so let's use this button right here. As you can see, let's remove the masked right here. Okay, select our mask and change the stencil ID to 1 because this is what we have. This is the value that we have inside of our first mask. Now you can notice that the transparency is not being applied correctly. And to fix that, you simply need to check Use Alpha Clip. Again, one last bit. Why is it better than using the default Unity mask in my opinion? This is because now you can grab the mask element, rotate it as you wish, select the mask, move it, and also rotate it without affecting the masked element. If you create a simple mask in Unity, so let's say image, okay, let's say mask, let's give it a mask component. Let's change the sprite to this one. Okay, we're also going to increase its size. Set it to green-ish. I'm going to use this green actually. Okay, I'm going to move it out of the way. Thank you. So this is a mask. We're going to add an image that we want to mask. Let's set this size to 300 by 300. Perfect. And change the color to, let's say, pink. Okay. It's not super visible. So maybe a darker color. Now, if we move the element, of course, it is masked. So this is really cool. But if we want to move our mask, you can't without moving the masked object. Same thing if you want to rotate your mask without moving the masked object. Oh, this effect is really nice. But yeah, now you can. And you can create some really cool animations or effects with this. I really hope that you've enjoyed the video. And if you want to have a concrete application of this, make sure to check out Mobile Mastery. We've got a super duper tutorial system in there. See you there. Bye-bye.